Welcome to Truth and Transcendence. You can find all our other episodes on truthandtranscendence.com. And today I'm delighted to welcome to the show special guest, Jody Brooks. Jody is a midlife transition and workplace coach who helps adults 35 years and over move from overwhelm, anxiety, and loss of identity into clarity and purpose. Drawing on his own messy midlife turning point, he guides clients through his 9 principles of authentic living to reconnect with their values and rediscover joy. Jody also facilitates men's groups in the homelessness and addiction sector, bringing deep compassion, integrity, and real-world experience to every conversation. So amazing work. And you can find Jody at authenticcoaching.me, and that will be in the show notes. So Jody, thank you so much for coming on the show.
No, thank you. I've been super excited to come and do this show, so thank you for having me.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, we were talking before we pressed the button today about the word that came through in our prequel, which was this word mutuality, and I was asking you about your relationship with your work and some of the guiding principles and essences of that for you. And this word mutuality came through. So may I ask you, please, Jody, to attempt to summarize for us what mutuality means to you?
I think that the mutuality came about in my coaching, I suppose, through my own healing journey from that messy midlife and unpacking myself and looking at things and realizing that I'd been in service to others, but at the detriment of being in service to myself. And one of the hardest bits, I think, of that journey was, for me, I'd had 47 years of being a people pleaser, all starting in childhood, trauma, those things, but I became a people pleaser. And in that, that was a huge component of my burnout and messy middle. But in it, what I really realized was, and then it's hard to come back from that because there's a feeling of selfishness. And when I work with clients, you get this all the time where people think, oh, that's selfish. And so, and we started having the conversation because I was saying, I don't believe in altruism because nobody actually does anything that's completely altruistic. It may look like it's altruistic, but there is something they're gaining from it. There's a need in them that makes them turn up to be altruistic. And so that was kind of where we started talking about it. And I realized it was lacking in my life, and in repairing myself, I did start doing the voluntary work. And that's where I hit on the beauty of this mutuality. And it it was the fact that, I go there, and it would be very easy to go there thinking you're superior or walking a higher ground. I work with the most vulnerable people at the edge of society, a lot of homeless, a lot of mental health problems, a lot of addiction. But I go there and I meet them on this level playing field because they bring to me a huge amount of joy and insight, and I've become a much better coach for working with them. And I think our conversation started because I had a conversation one day where I'd sat down with one of the people in the outreach service, and they hugged me and they said, thank you. And I said, no, thank you, because this had been this phenomenal conversation that had really inspired me in my coaching, because the problems in that arena, as stark as they may seem, are still very similar to the problems that I see in my coaching clients, business executives, all of those things. It's the very humanness of us. It's the human nature of it. And having gone from being around lots of people to building a coaching practice, I was missing human contact. And so, after he said thank you, I just looked him square in the face and said, no, thank you. And he was like, he just looked at me very blankly and was like, what have I done? And I just said, "You've been here, you've been present, and you have made me a better human being for this experience. And I've grown." And I think that was the conversation that we had, and this very much this thing of, I don't go to volunteer to be a good person. It's just lucky that people would say it makes me a good person. I don't think that makes me a good person. But I went to volunteer through my human need of contact, of compassion, of gratitude. And so in that, I turned up because I needed my pot filling up. And so it's me that has to be grateful because of those things. And so that, in my coaching practice goes back then to this mutuality of y- you must first be in service to yourself before you can be in service to others. Otherwise, what you do is not authentic, and many things then unravel. And I think that, taking that mutuality a step further is if that I then take that lens and look back over my life through that lens of mutuality, I can probably see that every single relationship that went wrong, every family breakdown, all of those things in my life that had left huge scars were because there was no mutuality in it, because I had turned up just to serve. And I served and served and served until I could serve no more. And at that point, the relationship would break down, or even before that sometimes. And I would be left asking, what's wrong with me? Like, what's wrong with me? What did I do? Like, I've shown up, I've done this, I've been such a good person, I did all these things for you, and you never even asked me. And I think that's kind of part of it as well. No, they never asked you, so why are you cross? If they'd asked you to do it and then didn't say thank you, you maybe could be cross. But when you look back through that lens and you see, actually, I don't think I'm a bad person, but I can see that I didn't turn up authentically. And so in that, I had my part to play in those, and some were pretty horrific. Some was one of them particularly, it was a very violent relationship that I was in. And when I looked back, I'd already forgiven that person. But what I hadn't done in it was look through that lens of mutuality and see that I hadn't been doing it mutually. And so I also had to forgive myself because I showed up unauthentically to that. I hope that gives an explanation and does it justice. It's
Beautiful,
quite a thing.
actually. That's very beautiful the way you've just described that. And it kind of triggers all sorts of things for me as well. That sense of you're in a situation, you feel really hard done by, you're stuck there, you keep trying to make it work, but you've completely forgotten to look after your own needs.
Mm.
And then you're upset because the other person isn't saying thank you or being considerate.
And the irony of that bit there is you just said, like, and then we get cross because they're ignoring our needs. But the fact of the matter is you already turned up ignoring your needs, so they followed your lead. So that's exactly what I'm kind of saying is, like, if you do that, you're showing up saying I don't matter. And so that you've given that instruction already. You've said, I don't matter. So how can you be cross? You almost told them to do it.
Yeah. But there's this weird illusion, isn't there, in the head that goes, I must keep doing this. Did
Yeah.
you explore, I mean, you said that you became a people pleaser and you kept trying to serve, and then you had this messy midlife, and then you got this insight. Do you have any insight now into the dynamic for you that kept you in the people pleasing mode as long as it did?
Yeah, like I I'm again, kind of this, and since we first spoke, I kind of looked back at my childhood through this lens of mutuality again, and I had a childhood that almost was um in two halves essentially. Um, I'm a Gen X, so it was the 70s. My parents separated when I was 6 months old. My father disappeared. Well, was supposed to pick me up on Christmas Day when I was 5, never showed up, and I never saw him again for another 15 years. And my relationship with my stepfather wasn't great. So, but it was that very kind of like, I hate saying this, but it was a very like middle England, white, middle class family on the outside. But what went on behind closed doors was very different. By the time I was 10, my mum's drinking had got to the point of being an alcohol dependent alcoholic. And so she would not know who I was when I came home from school and things. And it spiraled. But the people pleaser arrives because you learn very quickly as a human being that if I turn up and I show up and I do what's expected and I pacify people and I make it all okay and I do what they need, then I'm safe. Because, as a child, you don't have the bigger understanding. And so, we're all prefixed as human beings to survive. And so that survival mechanism, from the moment we're born, we have it. From the moment we're born as a child, we know to turn towards our mother's breast to feed. Like it's inbuilt. The the survival mechanism is inbuilt, and sometimes to our detriment. And so what I grew up doing was understanding that if I kept the peace, I could read a room. I could tell when that. So I became very good at walking into a room, sensing the energy, and then doing something to take the energy where there wouldn't be a reaction. And that hardcore is where the people pleasing got wired into me.
Yeah.
And then, but on the flip of that, I grew up in a rural community where I was, the whole thing about, it takes a village to raise a child. And I kind of think it's true because it was my saving grace because I had an outside world with huge connection. And so when we go back to this mutuality thing, the problem with the people pleasing is it also does give you a chemical rush. A lot of my couple of my coaching friends always they're executive and lead coaches and very kind of down the line, and they always refer to me as crystals and yoga. And I'm like, yeah, I am a bit crystals and yoga, but I'm crystals and yoga with science. Like, I love it because it does. But there are very big chemical reasons why it works. It's not just fluff. The science is now there to show you that it does. And so I think that's that thing. And so what also happens when you become a people pleaser is you learn to fire off of dopamine and endorphins. And so in childhood trauma, you get the dopamine from the fix of doing it, from completing that task and making it right. And you get the endorphins because you're constantly pushing through stress. But the problem with those hormones is they are those hormones of singularity. They don't involve any other human being. And so what you actually need to regulate them is oxytocin and serotonin. And those are the hormones of mutuality. They're the ones that are connected through compassion. So I didn't grow up bereft of it because I had it outside of the home. But my driving factor became this people pleaser. And so I truly believe that's why a lot of people like myself then become high achievers, because it's not just the achievement. They're addicted to the dopamine and the endorphin. They're addicted to the dopamine of achieving that thing and the endorphin of pushing through the stress all the time. And so I would say that, it's almost when people say, oh, I've been in survival mode. I spent the first 28 years of my life in survival mode. And I gradually took the pedal off. And it's a hard habit to break. It's a hard habit to break. And you then realize, because it's kind of that whole thing of, like I say all the time to clients, we live in a world where we think there's a right and a wrong. And a lot of the time I say there isn't. Both things are right. It just depends on the perspective. But because we hate that messy middle, as human beings, we like a yes or a no. so, so, so what happened for me then was like, I had to find a way to take all that I'd gained as a people pleaser and not see it as a bad thing. And that is that bit where, you sit in the middle in the mess and you just go, okay, well, it's not all bad. There were times where you're a people pleaser where it really paid off. So you now have to find that lens, and that lens became mutuality. But I think, that behavior beds in very early. And when your subconscious is reading all of those things, it's very hard then because that becomes your operating system. Your operating system and your subconscious has one objective in our lives, and that is to keep us safe. So if by the time you're 5, you've been programmed with that as a behavior, like you're going to run with it. And I did.
Yeah. Yeah. Great insights. Amazing. And interesting, that you got you kind of started traveling this insightful path as a result of everything being messy. But I've got a question. How can somebody are there sometimes people who are not addicted to the first 2 hormones, but addicted to the second 2, the serotonin and oxytocin? Are there people who are addicted to those 2?
I mean, I think we're all addicted to them, like the serotonin, particularly because it's a mood regulator. And, you know, I think the harder thing is it's harder because it's the reason that you can kind of get very drawn into the dopamine. This is where doom scrolling comes from. Like doom scrolling is because of the dopamine fix that people get by doom scrolling. That simple scroll tap is enough to flood your body, but it's very low level, which is why the doom scrolling goes for hours. But if you think about it, everybody would say there's an emptiness. It's like they're scrolling as though when they get to the bottom, they're going to find something, but you're not. You're never going to find it at the bottom of that scroll because there is no oxytocin and there is no serotonin at the bottom of that scroll because you actually need human connection to get those things. And so that's really truly now, as my work's expanding and my insights expanding and those things is, I'm starting to, if we look at why anxiety is off the scale, why overwhelm, why mental health is spiraling, why 91% of the UK population experience extreme stress at work is because in a world where we're told we're connected, we are actually so disconnected. And our bodies are firing on this dopamine and endorphin of stress and pushing through. And so I think genuinely I'm addicted to oxytocin and serotonin. I think they're the best things ever. But I also realize that to get those, I have to take action like going and volunteering, spending quality time with people, not relying on social media, not doing those things. And it's hard because in it, you kind of have to construct. So when I work through, interestingly, the 9 principles, they all look to an area of dopamine, endorphin, serotonin, and oxytocin. So it's about a balance because you couldn't survive on oxytocin and serotonin either. The dopamine is there because it's the reward, it's our drive, it's our motivation. So we do need it, but it's about where you place that, you know.
So
So
are we,
simple things.
are we sometimes chasing dopamine and endorphins when what we really need is serotonin and oxytocin?
Yeah,
So we're
completely.
chasing one thing that's not going to fulfill the need.
Yeah. Because you get like they're very separate things, and I always say like those 2 things, they're the hormones of singularity because we can do that ourselves. You know, I'm a great one for lists. I don't know whether you are, but ticking off a list gives you dopamine because it's a sense of achievement. So it is our reward hormone. Like we do need it. But what we're doing is we're hijacking our system where there isn't the other stuff that goes with it. And so that's the huge problem. And, you know, oxytocin and serotonin, I suppose, are much more emotional hormones. But you know what I love about oxytocin? Like, you know, the whole thing that like kindness is contagious. It really is. So there's been studies done, and if you're in a room and you see someone do something compassionate, that is enough for you to be flooded with oxytocin. So when you see someone do something kind, so I just say to people, like, go out in the world and do kind things, because it's not just the person you do it for, it's anybody that witnesses that. And if we just started doing that, wouldn't the world be so much more a magical place?
You're so right. I mean,
And
I love it if I see a movie, let's say, where people are being genuinely really kind to each other. It's incredibly satisfying, or even on a
that's why we like it's also why we like sad movies, because you get oxytocin from a sad movie. You don't have to, the amount you get differs, but just by witnessing it, by witnessing that emotion.
yeah.
And so, again, if you think about what people's social media streams are full of, the problem then is that if you're doom scrolling and all you're seeing is negative, you will then also start to fire your stress response. So then this is when you start flooding yourself with cortisol as well, because your body thinks it's in a heightened state of stress and you're scrolling, but it primes you to run. And so, 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 like, kind of being careful of what your algorithm is. I mean, I am so rigid with mine. I mean, like, and I think sometimes my partner jokes because, like, you scroll mine and it is all like crystals and yoga and sweetness and light. And so I don't have, I don't have political stuff in mind because I've been very careful about how the algorithm gets trained to me. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot you have to be careful of there.
Absolutely. So this also reminds me of people who get really fixed on something that really stimulates them. Like, have you ever watched or listened to Alex Jones? Do you know who that is?
No, no, no.
No. All right. Very popular American broadcaster, but very much into sort of conspiracy theories and that kind of thing, and shouting at the top of his voice at the screen. And, I've known people find that really stimulating. It's like a form of doom scrolling.
Mhm.
And then they get really excited and go around shouting at all their friends about it. And they can't stop. It's like they're addicted to it. And it's like there's this sort of energy flooding through their body that they're addicted
And
to as they do that.
I think, like, also, certainly in, I always say, on top of this dose and the endorphins and the mutuality is that, every single human being requires, and I think when you work in addiction, homelessness, mental health, you start to see where these people have at some point experienced not having these things in their life, which is to be seen, to be heard, to be listened to, and to belong. And so, to go to your question there, is that sometimes these kind of sensitive things, they give us a sense of belonging. So, like, to throw yourself into that conspiracy theory, to campaign, to do all of those things, they give you a sense of belonging. And again, that will give you oxytocin and some serotonin as well, because it's a form of connection.
Yeah. And just to say to the listeners, this is not a downer on conspiracy theories, because it could be the other side of the extreme. It could be, I don't know, I love Trump or whatever it
Yeah.
might be, could be your obsession that
Mhm.
where you're chasing something to try to feed something in you, but you're not chasing the right thing, is what you're saying. You're saying it's like
Yeah.
a habitual chasing after the wrong. It's like that looking for love in all the wrong places song, isn't
Uh,
it?
yeah, completely. And I think that's, and I think that sense of belonging is possibly huge now. And, when we're looking at that thing, because, it's it's very hard to get a sense of belonging online. It's very, very hard to get a sense of belonging online. You can get a form of belief, but I would argue, I'm not the scientist, but the insightful journeyer person that journeys, and would say it's very hard to get a true sense of belonging in the digital world. but it fulfills so many other things in us as a human being that it's a wolf in sheep's clothing. And I don't think all the time people are really aware of what it's stealing from them.
Yeah, yeah. And do you feel there's a connection between us being kind of depleted in terms of what we really need, and our susceptibility to getting sucked into that negative aspect of social media, for example?
Yeah, I think so. I think, I truly believe that there is an awakening about to come. And I think that we're going to see it in our younger generations. And I think they're already wised up to it. I think they are slowly shifting and understanding. And I would argue that that's where lots of things like, yeah, have a blog post that I haven't yet published that I'm still working on because I quite often have to write a bit, go away and come back. But it's about that. It's about the identity piece around why the sudden surge in non-binary and why the sudden surge in all of these things. And I always say, like when we get these things, we think they're the problem, but they're not. They're a symptom of a bigger problem. And ask yourself why all of a sudden a huge section of society, particularly in a certain age group, is saying, I don't want to belong to that because they don't see themselves in it anymore. And so I think that that is part of this awakening of discovering human connection, but discovering it on their terms. Look, I'm a Gen X, so that when this started to happen, I was the same as lots of other people. And was like, oh my God, really? Like, what is that about? Like it's just a natural instinct in you. Until I went, you know what, that's not the problem, Jody. Like, look at it. What's it a symptom of? And it is a symptom of this thing, if you kind of go, is that I don't wish to conform to that, and so I think it is this beginning of a journey of people going back to what I said, of learning to be in service to themselves. It's almost like when something goes too far one way, it's 360 degrees and it comes back round on itself. And I really feel like those teenage generations now are going to be the ones that do the 360 and go, enough's enough.
Well, there has been a lot of swinging back round already in relationship to
Yeah.
it now, hasn't there?
Mm.
There's laws being passed in the States, which is, no, you cannot cut off a child's genitals. It's
Yeah.
illegal. You're not
Yeah.
allowed to do that, which bizarre that has to be made a law, but there are, as you say, you're absolutely right. There are swingbacks. And actually this thing about the gender thing that you picked up on, I can remember something which could be the roots of that right back from when I was a child. That thing of, I don't want to be limited by my gender. I don't want to be limited by the fact that I'm female. And
Yeah.
females looking at males and going, being male, you're not limited. What do we know? Males actually can feel limited by being males just as much. Well,
Right. I think
in more subtle ways, right? Not necessarily so
yeah.
obviously, but just as much. That there's just as much of a trap. So part of that thing you're talking about, there's this whole theme, isn't there, in what we're talking about, of people trying to get something to fulfill a need where that thing isn't going to fulfill that need.
No.
And it sounds like
Because
you've got very connected to that.
yeah, and I think it is that thing, we go to those things there. And I think, for me, all of that, on this, the gender thing is, it astounds me that we still educate and raise our children based on their gender. That, this is the 21st century and there is plenty of research to show that any form label limits a child in that sense. Very easily you can limit a child. And so I don't think, and then that's again when I go to like the system of, kids now saying, well, I don't think, I think I'm not the right gender. And it's like, but why are we still subjecting them to almost a decision? and you're asking them to make a decision that actually dictates the rest of their life. So the problem isn't that. That is a symptom of understanding the pressure that we're placing on our children. And we're asking them to sum up all they are by whether they're male or female. And if I, like you've just said, if I said that to any adult, like, you have to sum up your entire existence by your gender, well, you wouldn't be happy about that. But we're raising our children, telling them that that's exactly what we must do. You know, you must decide now, and your whole life will be based on it. And, you know, like you've just said, you know, and it's interesting because I loved, as you said there about men, like being a man right now is quite challenging because of the surge of the word, which I hate, toxic masculinity. But, you know, as a gay male that grew up, I was also suffered at the hands of that. Like, it's not exclusively a game based on gender. I suffered at the hands of a lot of those things. I don't believe in the word toxic masculinity. I believe that it is negative masculinity because there are many positive elements of masculinity. And I think the same exists for feminine. And I think we should be a lot more careful about how we choose to label things. And labeling a whole section of society as toxic is pretty damaging,
Yeah.
particularly when that particular gender still the highest rate of deaths for that gender under the age of 50 is suicide. And so when you use the word toxic, understand that you shut an emotional door for men that might actually be their lifeline. So do I agree with kids that say non-binary? Totally, because labels are very, very damaging.
Fascinating. Yeah. I didn't know that statistic. That's
It's the
very,
largest killer in the UK, yeah, of
very,
men under 50.
very, very shocking.
Mm.
I just heard last night that a man who I don't know terribly well had took his life late last year. I only met him a few weeks before he took his life, and he was very, very unhappy and was desperately trying to do something about it, but he just couldn't. He couldn't get what he needed to help him, and then he was
And I,
gone.
and I think that's it there. When you can't argue that is, there was an amazing experiment done in a primary school on the Isle of Wight, which was the gender neutral school. And um, I defy anybody to watch it and not see that we really should have got rid of gender in schools in the sense of using it to stream, because they very openly prove there that that is where, that negative element of masculinity, for me it was as well. I was never going to be a footballer. I was never going to do any of those things. And so I was made to feel less than. And, you're also then like, be a man about it, man up, men don't cry. Like, these are all these things that we tell men. And then there's a whole list of horrific things we tell women, we tell
Women
girls.
don't get angry.
Yeah. Like, it's almost the opposite of it. And so I'm like, shoot, again, I tell you what we should do. We'll sit in that messy middle together, shall we? And we'll just hatch out what's right for each of us. And I think then that's back to mutuality. You first have to come home to yourself before you can possibly get it right out there in the world.
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to mention, actually, I feel prompted to mention your upcoming podcast. Please tell us what the name of your upcoming podcast is.
So my upcoming podcast is indeed called Messy Midlife. It's not a crisis. It's a calling to connect. Yeah.
Fantastic. I saw a post that you put up about it, and I thought, that is just genius.
I'm really touched, thank you, because like, I toyed with the idea for a long time. Probably about a year ago, I went on a day's course. I came away. I was like, I don't know whether I could do this. And so I've sat with it for a year. But I think, in the last year, I've done a lot of podcast guesting. And I've just realized how powerful a space it is, and um, how it opens media up to everybody, and it's the most beautiful way to give everybody a voice. I almost think it's like anti-celebrity. This is my new thing. It's like anti-celebrity. And so, there's that whole bit back to, it's funny, isn't it, how we do these circles in our conversations, but back to this whole thing of social media and externalizing and aspiring to be all these things out there. But, there are so many amazing stories. I meet so many amazing people. And I just decided that, yeah, a podcast about that my experience, and I already know that there are others out there to share that space and normalize it, because it you know it's just a sign of your humanity, and it really isn't a crisis. In fact, the reason it's a calling to connect, because when I work with clients, I say, you know part of the reason it exists is our lives are moving at such a fast pace these days that, when I arrived at 50, I was like, well, this doesn't look at all familiar, because all the concepts of it I'd grown up with. And I think pretty much, post-war, baby boomer, Gen X upwards, it's moving at such a pace that, my grandparents grew up with a very big, by 50, it would be this, and you would do this, and you would do this. And when I look at photographs of them, in fact, I looked at a photograph the other day and worked out that I think my grandmother could only have been 55 in the picture, but she looks like she's 75, just in terms of dress and appearance, and how I thought of it. And so I think when as we arrive at these ages, we're like, well, hang on a moment. What's it? so, so when I work with clients, I go, but look, what you have to understand is that is so, so, so exciting, because we don't have to conform, and you get to say what 50 looks like, and you get to say what 60 looks like, and 70 and 80 and 90 beyond that. You just have to pick up the pen and write the next chapter. And so I think it's an amazing time to be alive, but you're going to have to switch your view and sit in the mess for a little bit. It's great in the mess. That's where creativity exists.
Absolutely right. Beautifully said. Well, actually, that brings us to a beautiful point, actually, for me to sort of lead into the wrap up for the conversation. So, some of the people who listen to the show, probably quite a few of them actually, because of the nature of the show, are also out there doing their bit, trying to help raise consciousness, help people with their leaders, parents, whatever it might be, right? So is there something you'd like to say to those people who might be listening to us now?
I think, never ever doubt how bright the light is that you shine in the world, but make sure that you never take your eye off the fuel that is required for that light. And that fuel is within you, and it remains connected in you. Always be in service to yourself, because that's how you truly show up authentically, to be in the service of others. And that is truly compassionate. You should never be in service to others at the detriment of yourself. To give the analogy that I use with clients, when you get on a plane, before it takes off, they take you through the safety features, and they will tell you that you must always put the oxygen mask on yourself before trying to help others.
We've all heard multiple times. Do we apply it?
Nope.
We've talked about a lot today, and it's been really I knew it would be fascinating. I had no idea exactly where it was going to go, and I'm guessing you probably didn't either. Has there been
No.
has there been a favorite part of our conversation for you today?
I think for me, and I'm eternally, so grateful for, that that piece, for the mutuality, for the understanding of that, and for that connection, and also, for those bigger pieces in a world that maybe sometimes feels chaotic and messy, and that we don't recognize it, is to not jump, like the things that we've said about gender and those things, is to not jump in and try and fix that, but to stand back and observe it and ask the bigger question. Ask the question, like, look at it and see the symptom and ask why, because in that there is true human development. And for all our messiness, I hope it's come across, is that I think when we're messy, that's when our humanity is at its best.
100% agree. Thank you so much. And for everything you've shared today, beautiful and powerful. And let's just remind people where to find you, which is authenticcoaching.me. So everybody do go and check out that website, and do check out my other podcast episodes on truthandtranscendence.com. And also, if you'd like to find out what else I'm doing, which includes coaching and workshops and juicy stuff like that, go to beingspace.world. So thank you so much, Jody, for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you. It's been an absolute joy. I will bounce back to my study this afternoon.
Excellent.